The elevator doors open on the 34th floor, and that's where it happened. Not in a back alley, not in a parking lot at midnight. Right there in the gleaming marble lobby of Whitmore Capitol Tower, one of the most expensive buildings in the city, at 7 in the morning, with the sun barely over the skyline and the day barely begun. Arthur Whitmore III stepped out of that elevator like he owned the world, because as far as he was concerned, he did. He was 28 years old, 6 feet tall, custom suit, hair slicked back the way men in certain circles believed made them look powerful. He had the jawline of someone who'd never worked a day without a safety net beneath him, and the eyes of someone who'd never been told no in a language he had to take seriously. He was talking on his phone, loudly, the way people talk when they want everyone around them to understand they are the most important person in the room. "Just tell Henderson his numbers are embarrassing," Arthur said, barely looking where he was walking. "I don't care what his excuse is. I want results, or I want his resignation on my desk by Friday." He turned the corner and walked directly into a mop bucket. Water splashed across the polished marble floor. A few drops hit the toe of his Italian leather shoes. He stumbled. Not badly, not embarrassingly, but enough to knock the phone from his hand. It clattered on the floor. Arthur looked down. Then he looked up. Standing 3 feet away, holding a mop handle with both hands, was an old man, 60-something. Dark brown skin lined with years. Small frame. White custodial uniform with the Whitmore Tower logo stitched on the chest pocket. He was looking at Arthur with calm, steady eyes, not afraid, not apologetic, just present, like a man who had seen this kind of moment before and had long ago decided how he would carry himself through it. "I'm sorry, sir," the old man said quietly. "I should have had the caution sign up already." Arthur stared at him. Then he did something that would change both of their lives forever. He picked up his phone, looked at the old man with pure contempt, and spat. Not near him, not past him, at him. The spit caught the shoulder of the old man's uniform. "Watch where you put your equipment," Arthur said. "This is a professional building, not a barn." He straightened his jacket and walked away. Behind him, the old man stood completely still. He did not wipe the uniform immediately. He did not call after Arthur. He did not react the way you'd expect a man who had just been spat on in public to react. He simply stood there in the middle of that gleaming lobby and watched Arthur Whitmore walk toward the executive elevator bank. And then, slowly, deliberately, the old man reached into the front pocket of his white uniform and pulled out a phone. Not a cheap one. He dialed a number from memory. "It's me," he said softly when the line picked up. "Start the clock." Nobody in that lobby knew what those 3 words meant, but they were about to find out. His name was Elias James Monroe, but most people who knew him well, really knew him, just called him EJ. He was 64 years old, born in a 2-bedroom house in South Birmingham to a schoolteacher mother and a factory worker father who believed 2 things with his whole chest: that a man's word was his bond, and that the quietest person in the room was usually the most dangerous. EJ had taken both lessons seriously. He had grown up watching his father come home from the factory with soot on his hands and dignity in his spine, and he had decided very young that he would build something, not to prove anything to anyone, not for revenge, not out of anger, out of love, love for the idea that a man who started with nothing could, through patience, through sacrifice, through an almost terrifying discipline, build something that outlasted him. EJ had started his first business at 22, a small cleaning service. Just him, 2 cousins, and a van that broke down more than it ran. They cleaned office buildings at night, supermarkets before dawn, hospitals after midnight. For 11 years, EJ worked hours that would have broken most people. He kept every dollar he could. He reinvested everything he didn't need to survive. At 33, he bought his first property, a rundown commercial building in a neighborhood everyone else had written off. At 39, he had a portfolio of 12 buildings. At 45, he quietly acquired a small regional bank that was struggling, restructured it, backed it with his real estate holdings, and turned it profitable within 18 months. At 52, he began buying shares in struggling companies, not to strip them, not to gut them for parts. He studied each one for months before moving, and when he moved slowly, invisibly, until one day the company's board would look up and realize a quiet man from Birmingham now held more of their future than they did. At 64, Elias James Monroe was worth somewhere north of $4 billion. He never appeared on Forbes lists. He declined every interview request. He did not own a yacht or a jet under his own name. He drove a 12-year-old Buick and ate lunch from a deli 2 blocks from whatever building needed his personal attention that week. This week, that building was Whitmore Capital Tower. Because 3 months ago, EJ had finished acquiring controlling interest in Whitmore Capital Group, the company Arthur Whitmore III was so proud to work for. The company Arthur's father, Gerald Whitmore, had built over 4 decades. EJ owned 51% of it. Gerald Whitmore didn't know yet. Nobody knew yet, because that was the way EJ worked. He didn't announce. He didn't threaten. He didn't make speeches. He watched. He had spent 40 years watching men like Arthur Whitmore, young, careless, convinced that their name was a shield, that their family's money made them untouchable, that the people below them were props in a story that only they were the heroes of. He had seen what happened to those men when the world finally showed them the truth. And so, at 64 years old, Elias James Monroe had put on a white custodial uniform and spent 3 weeks cleaning the lobbies and hallways of Whitmore Tower at dawn. Not because he had to, because he wanted to see what he was about to inherit. And this morning, standing in the lobby with spit on his shoulder, he had seen exactly what he needed to see. He walked to the utility closet at the end of the hall. He took off the uniform top, folded it carefully, and placed it in the bag. Underneath, he was wearing a clean white dress shirt. He sat down on a small stool, opened his phone, and began making calls. Quiet calls. Short ones. The kind that, from the outside, wouldn't seem like much. From the inside, they were the sound of a world beginning to change. But Arthur Whitmore was 34 floors above him, laughing about quarterly projections. He had no idea the floor was already gone. 2 people had seen what happened in the lobby. The first was a young woman named Deja Simmons, 23 years old, junior analyst at a financial consulting firm that rented 3 floors of Whitmore Tower. She had been waiting for the elevator when Arthur came around the corner. She had watched the whole thing with her hand pressed over her mouth. She didn't say anything. She couldn't move. But her phone, the phone she'd been holding when she stepped into the lobby, had been recording a voice memo. She always recorded her own notes on the way into the building, reminders to herself for the day ahead. The camera had been angled slightly wrong. It hadn't caught Arthur's face clearly, but it caught the sound, crystal clear, the wet sound, the contemptuous words, the silence after. The second witness was Marcus Webb, 41 years old, head of building security. He had been watching the lobby feeds from the second-floor control room when it happened. He rewound the footage 3 times because he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The camera in the main lobby was high definition, motion activated. It had caught everything. Arthur's face, the mop, the bucket, the spit, clear as glass. Marcus Webb sat staring at his monitor for a long moment. Then he pulled out his personal cell phone, not the work one, and called his brother-in-law, who worked for a local news station. "Derek," Marcus said quietly, "I need you to meet me for coffee. Bring your laptop. There's something you need to see." By 8:30, Deja was in the bathroom on the 7th floor, staring at the audio on her phone. She was shaking slightly. She had worked in this building for 8 months. She knew Arthur Whitmore's name, because everyone did. She knew his reputation. She had heard the stories, the way he talked to assistants, the way he dismissed people who he decided didn't matter. She had always told herself it wasn't her business. She had student loans. She had a job to keep. But she kept seeing the old man's face. That stillness. That quiet, terrible calm of a man who had been reduced to a prop in someone else's cruelty and had chosen not to break. She opened her Instagram, posted the audio clip. She didn't name Arthur. She didn't name the building. She just wrote, "Witnessed something in a building lobby this morning that I cannot stop thinking about. An old black janitor, a young executive. I have never been more ashamed to share a zip code with someone. The silence after is what's haunting me." She put her phone in her pocket and went back to her desk. 22 minutes later, The Post had 4,000 shares. By 9 a.m., three things were happening simultaneously that Arthur Whitmore knew nothing about. 1. Marcus Webb had met his brother-in-law Derek at a coffee shop around the corner. Derek watched the security footage on Marcus's phone. He asked 3 questions. Then he drove back to the station. 2. Deja Simmons's post had been screenshot and reshared on Twitter, where a journalist named Camille Reyes, who covered corporate culture and workplace inequality for a mid-sized investigative outlet, had already seen it and was looking into which building matched the lobby description. 3. In a utility closet of Whitmore Tower, Elias James Monroe was on his 3rd phone call of the morning. He was speaking to a woman named Patricia Chun, the most feared corporate attorney in the southeastern United States. "Patricia," he said, "I want to move the timeline up." "How far up?" she asked. 72 hours. Silence on the line. "EJ," Patricia said carefully. "The board doesn't even know yet. They'll know by Friday," he said. "Make sure the paperwork is airtight. And Patricia, make sure Gerald Whitmore is in the building when it happens." Another pause. "You're sure you want to do it this way?" EJ looked down at the folded uniform in the bag at his feet, at the white fabric with the Whitmore Tower logo on the pocket. "I've been sure for 40 years, he said. 34 floors up, Arthur Whitmore was ordering his 3rd espresso and complaining about his parking space. He had completely forgotten about the janitor. That was the first mistake. There would be more. The notification came through at 9:47. Arthur's assistant, a sharp 26-year-old named Billionaire who had learned, very quickly, to anticipate his moods, appeared in his office doorway with a particular expression she wore when the information she was carrying was the kind that could turn a morning sideways. "There's something circulating online," she said, "about an incident this morning. In the lobby." Arthur looked up from his desk. "What kind of incident?" "An audio clip. A woman posted it. She described..." Priya paused, chose her words. She described a young male executive verbally attacking a black janitor in the lobby of a high-rise building. Arthur stared at her. "She doesn't name you," Priya continued. "She doesn't name the building, but the description is specific enough that people are asking questions." Arthur leaned back in his chair, studied the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee and took a slow sip. "It's vague," he said. "Without names or footage, it's nothing. People post things like this every day. It'll be gone by tomorrow." Priya nodded, but she didn't move. "Is there something else?" Arthur asked. "The post has been shared 40,000 times, she said, in the last hour." Arthur set down the coffee. "Find out who posted it," he said. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, a visitor had arrived at Whitmore Tower. Her name was Camille Reyes. She was 37, with the kind of focused energy that made people instinctively step aside. She had spent 15 years as an investigative journalist, and she had a particular talent for finding the thread that nobody else thought to pull. She had recognized the lobby from Deja's description, the particular marble, the shape of the elevator bank in the background of a photo Deja had posted 3 months ago at a company event. She walked in, looked around, and identified the security camera in the upper left corner of the main lobby within 45 seconds. She walked to the front desk. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "I'm looking to speak to someone in building management about a potential feature story we're running on building safety standards in corporate high-rises." The woman at the desk smiled. "Of course. Let me get the facilities coordinator for you." Camille smiled back. She was very good at asking questions that sounded like different questions. Upstairs, Arthur's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered it. "Mr. Whitmore." The voice was smooth, professional. "Female. My name is Patricia Chun. I represent a client who has a significant interest in Whitmore Capital Group. My client has asked me to reach out and inform you that there will be a board meeting called for this Friday. Your presence is requested." Arthur frowned. "I'm not on the board. My father is." "Yes," Patricia said. "Your father has been notified as well. My client simply wished to extend the courtesy of advance notice to members of the Whitmore family." "Who is your client?" A brief, perfect pause. "That will be made clear at the meeting," Patricia said. "Have a good morning, Mr. Whitmore." The line went dead. Arthur stared at his phone. He called his father immediately. Gerald Whitmore answered on the second ring. He was 66 years old, the kind of man who had built his company through 30 years of handshakes and strategy, and his voice carried the controlled weight of a man who did not like surprises. "Arthur," Gerald said, "I was about to call you. Did you get a call from a woman named Patricia Chun?" Silence. "Dad," Arthur said, "what's going on?" "I don't know yet," Gerald said slowly, "but I've been looking at our shareholder registry this morning, and there's something irregular. Someone has been buying shares. Quietly. For over a year." "How much?" Gerald's voice was very careful when he answered. "Enough," he said, "to matter." Arthur Whitmore felt something cold move through his chest. He didn't know what it was yet, but the janitor's face flashed across his mind for the first time since the lobby. He dismissed it. A coincidence. An old man with a mop had nothing to do with corporate shareholders. He was wrong about that too. By 11 a.m., Arthur had a plan. He always had a plan. That was the thing about men like Arthur. They were not stupid. Careless, yes. Arrogant, certainly. But not stupid. And when the ground started to feel unsteady beneath them, their instinct was to move fast, hit hard, and control the narrative before anyone else could. He called the company's head of PR, a slick, experienced operator named Scott Farley, who'd been managing the Whitmore family's public image for 12 years. "Scott," Arthur said, "there's a social media thing developing. I need you to get ahead of it." "I've already seen it," Scott said. "The audio post. I've been monitoring." "Good. Can you kill it?" "Not directly, but we can dilute it. I can have a counter-narrative running within 2 hours. Vague enough to deny, specific enough to plant doubt. Anonymous source says the clip is taken out of context. The executive in question was responding to a confrontation initiated by a building staff member." Arthur nodded. "Do it." "There's a second thing," Scott said, and his voice shifted slightly. "A journalist named Camille Reyes was in your building this morning. I have a contact in building management who flagged it." Arthur was quiet for a moment. He knew Camille Reyes' name. Everyone in the corporate world knew her name. What did she want? She said it was a story on building safety standards. But EJ, that's not what she was asking about. What was she asking about? She was asking about the security camera footage from the main lobby this morning, between 7 and 7:30. The cold thing moved through Arthur's chest again. "Scott," he said, "I need that footage pulled." "Arthur, I'm not asking." A long pause. "I'll make a call. But if that footage has already been copied or shared with anyone, make sure it hasn't been," Arthur said and hung up. He was too late. At 11:14 a.m., 8 minutes before Arthur made that call, Marcus Webb had already sent a copy of the footage to his brother-in-law Derek at the news station. It was sitting in an encrypted folder on a secure server. At 11:19 a.m., Camille Reyes had met with Deja Simmons in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building. Deja had played her the full audio recording, the complete, unedited version, which was 47 seconds longer than what she had posted online. The extra 47 seconds contained something Deja hadn't realized she needed to include. After Arthur walked away, the old man on the recording had made a phone call, and the person on the other end had said in a clear, unhurried voice, "It's done. Send the notice to the board." Camille Reyes had listened to those 47 seconds 3 times. Then she had asked Deja one question. "The old man in the lobby, did you get a look at his face?" Deja nodded. "Yes." He was older, calm, dark brown skin. He had this presence, like he wasn't scared at all. Like he was the only person in that lobby who knew exactly what was happening. Camille pulled out her laptop. She typed a name into a search engine. An image came up, an old, grainy photograph from a business journal profile piece published 14 years ago, the only photograph this particular man had ever allowed. She turned the laptop to face Deja. "Is that him?" Deja looked at the screen. Her eyes widened. "Yes," she said softly. "That's him. Who is that?" Camille closed the laptop. "Nobody important," she said carefully. "Not yet." At 11:40 a.m., the building's head of security informed Arthur's assistant that the lobby footage from that morning had been flagged as under review and could not be accessed by outside parties. Arthur breathed easier. When he heard that, he shouldn't have. Because at the same moment, 3 floors below the executive suite, in a shared workspace that Whitmore Capital rented out to smaller firms, a 22-year-old IT contractor named Jordan Mills had been running routine system diagnostics when he noticed something unusual. 2 minutes before the footage was flagged for review, someone had already accessed it remotely, not from inside the building, from an external server with an encryption signature Jordan had never seen before. Someone had pulled a full copy of that footage before anyone tried to suppress it. Jordan sat and stared at a screen. Then he did something he would later describe as the most terrifying and important decision of my professional life. He took a screenshot of the access log. He saved it to a personal cloud drive. He closed the diagnostic window, and he went back to his lunch. Arthur Whitmore stood at the window of his 34th floor office and looked out at the city. He felt better now. The footage was contained. The PR narrative was running. The online clip would fade. He had handled it. That's what he believed at 11:45 in the morning. He had handled it. The man who arrived at Elias Monroe's downtown office at 12:30 p.m. was named Robert Achabe. He was 53 years old, former CFO of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Currently, he was EJ's most trusted financial advisor and one of 4 people on earth who knew the full scope of what EJ had been building. Robert sat across from EJ in the small, deliberately modest office EJ, kept in a building 4 miles from Whitmore Tower. No art on the walls. No view. 2 chairs, a desk, and a whiteboard. The timeline moved up, Robert said. It wasn't a question. This morning changed things, Jay said. Robert nodded slowly. He didn't ask what happened this morning. EJ had told him on the phone. Robert had worked with EJ for 19 years. He understood the significance of what that moment in the lobby represented, not just as a personal insult, but as a final confirmation of a pattern EJ had been documenting for months. If we move the board announcement to Friday, Robert said, we're compressing the integration plan by 3 weeks. The regulatory filings. Patricia has it, EJ said. She's been ready for this for 6 months. I asked her to be ready for this. Robert paused. You knew this might happen? EJ looked at him levelly. Robert, I spent 3 weeks cleaning lobbies in that building. What do you think I saw? Robert was quiet for a moment. The online footage, he said. It's going to create noise before the board meeting. That's fine. It's going to be traced back to Arthur. When it is, Gerald Whitmore is going to try to use the distraction to call an emergency shareholder vote to block the transfer. I know. He has relationships with 4 of the 7 remaining board members. He did, EJ said simply. As of this morning, 2 of those 4 received notification of certain loan arrangements their personal holdings company has with the First Southern Regional Bank. Robert stared at him. EJ, he said carefully, you own First Southern Regional. I do. Those board members' personal loans their assets are collateralized against positions I now hold, EJ said. I'm not threatening anyone, Robert. I'm simply ensuring that certain people have accurate information about who they're in business with before they make decisions. Robert sat back. The silence in the room was large and full. The third thing, EJ said, Arthur is going to try to find out who I am before Friday. He'll start asking questions today. His PR man will look. His father will look. And EJ stood up and walked to the whiteboard. He uncapped a marker. Let them find the surface, he said. Give them the LLC structure, the real estate holdings, the public-facing companies. He wrote a number on the board. Nothing that connects back to the bank or to Whitmore Capital's shareholder registry. Not yet. You want them to think they know who they're dealing with. I want them to think they found the bottom, EJ said. When men like Arthur Whitmore think they found the bottom, they stop digging. Robert looked at the number on the whiteboard. And then, he asked, EJ capped the marker. Set it down. Then Friday comes, he said, 3 miles away. In a gleaming office with view of the whole city, Arthur Whitmore was typing a name into a Google search. Elias James Monroe. The results came up then. A few old property records. A small news mention from 11 years ago. An Alabama business registry filing. Arthur skimmed it. Small-time real estate, he muttered. That's it. He closed the browser. He had no idea he was looking at a door, and that behind that door was an ocean. The afternoon moved fast. Camille Reyes had 3 sources working simultaneously by 2 p.m. The first was Marcus Webb, who had agreed to be an anonymous source after Camille assured him his identity would be protected and that the footage was already secured in a way that could not be reversed. Marcus walked her through what he had seen. He described the expression on EJ's face after Arthur walked away, the absence of fear, the deliberate calm, the phone call. He wasn't surprised, Marcus told her over the phone. That's the thing I keep thinking about. A man just spat on him in public, and he looked like he was watching a chess piece move exactly where he expected. Camille wrote that down, underlined it. The second source was Jordan Mills, who had reached out to Camille directly after finding her outlet story request form online. He had attached a screenshot of the access log, the proof that someone had remotely copied the lobby footage at 11:12 a.m. before Arthur's people had tried to suppress it. Camille had a technology consultant verify the log's authenticity within 40 minutes. It was real, which meant somewhere someone had an untouched, uncorrupted copy of the lobby footage, and that someone had moved to secure it before the suppression attempt happened, as if they knew the suppression was coming. The third source was the most unexpected. His name was Dennis Okafor. He was 61 years old, retired, and had worked as a mid-level executive at Whitmore Capital Group for 16 years before quietly leaving 4 years ago. He had seen Deja's audio post that morning and spent 3 hours deciding whether to make a call he'd been considering for 4 years. At 1:45 p.m., he called Camille Reyes. "I need you to understand something first," Dennis said when they got on the phone. "What happened this morning, what that young man did to that janitor, that is not an isolated incident. It is the culture of that company. It has been the culture of that company for 20 years. I watched it. I survived it, barely, and I left." "Tell me," Camille said. Dennis talked for 47 minutes. He described a workplace where Black and Latino employees were systematically passed over for promotions regardless of performance, where HR complaints were buried, where Arthur Whitmore, even as a teenager accompanying his father to summer visits, had treated support staff as furniture. He described a specific incident 7 years ago when Arthur, then 21 and newly added to the company roster as a junior executive, had made a phone call that resulted in a veteran Black employee being terminated for a policy violation Arthur himself had committed the same week. The man's name was Calvin Osei, Dennis said. He had been with the company for 19 years. He lost his pension. Camille was very quiet. "Is Calvin Osei findable?" she asked. "I've kept in touch with him," Dennis said. "I'll ask him if he's willing to talk." At 2:50 p.m., while Camille was on her 4th interview, Arthur's PR man, Scott, called with news. "The counter-narrative isn't working," Scott said, and there was something different in his voice now. Tighter. "The original post is still climbing, and there's a second thread developing. People are trying to identify the building. They don't have the footage," Arthur said. "There's an access log circulating," Scott said. "Someone leaked a screenshot showing the footage was copied remotely before we flagged it for review." Arthur stood up from his desk. "That's not possible," he said. "It happened at 11:12 a.m., Scott said. 14 minutes before you called me." The silence on Arthur's end of the line was very long. "Who?" Arthur asked. "I don't know," Scott said. "But whoever it was, they were watching. They moved before we did." Arthur walked to his window again. Below him, the city moved in its ordinary afternoon rhythm. Cars, people, the shadow of the building across the sidewalk. "Scott," he said, "pull everything you can on Elias Monroe. The Birmingham real estate guy? I already looked. He's..." "Pull everything," Arthur said again. "Harder. Not just the surface. Go deep. Every subsidiary, every LLC, every acquisition. Go back 20 years if you have to." A pause. "That's going to take time." "You have until tomorrow morning," Arthur said. He hung up. He stood at the window for a long time. Something was wrong. He could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Not seeing anything yet, but your body knows. The air is different. The light is different. He thought about the janitor. The phone call. Start the clock. He had heard it from 15 feet away. He had written it off. A maintenance call, probably a complaint to a supervisor. But what if it wasn't? Arthur turned from the window. He walked to his desk, sat down, and opened his laptop. He typed 3 words into a legal database search he subscribed to. Elias James Monroe. This time, he didn't just skim the results. He read. And 20 minutes later, Arthur Whitmore's face was the color of paper. Because Elias James Monroe didn't just own real estate. He owned the building Arthur was sitting in. At 4 p.m., Arthur convinced himself he had regained control. Here is how he told himself that story. The footage was secured. The remote copy was concerning, but without knowing who had it or what they planned to do with it, it was still a problem he could manage. The PR narrative was underperforming, but the original post still had no names attached to it. The Monroe situation, that was more significant. But E.J. Monroe owned the building through a shell company that had been almost impossible to trace. Arthur's legal team had spent 3 hours doing what they thought was a deep dive and come up with a man who owned approximately $40 million in commercial real estate across 3 states. Significant, yes. A complication, yes, but not a catastrophe. Arthur had called 2 of his father's oldest allies on the board. Both men had been reassuring. One had said flatly, "Nobody moves on Whitmore Capital without Gerald's blessing. That hasn't changed in 30 years. Arthur had felt the ground solidify under him. He called his father. "I think we're fine," Arthur said. "Monroe is small. The board is solid. And the online thing is dying down." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "The board," he said. "You spoke to Henderson and Park?" "Yes, they're with us." "Good." A pause. "Arthur, the janitor this morning." Arthur's jaw tightened slightly. "It was nothing, Dad. I reacted poorly to a situation. It won't become a story." "Make sure of that," Gerald said. "Because if it does become a story, at the same time as the shareholder situation, the combination of the two, it won't," Arthur said firmly. Gerald didn't respond immediately. "Dad, I trust you," Gerald said, in the voice of a man choosing those words very carefully. At 4:23 p.m., Arthur left the building early. He felt not good, exactly, but manageable. He felt like a man who had walked to the edge of something and stepped back. He was in the back of his car, loosening his tie, when his phone rang. It was Henderson, the board member, the one who had said 2 hours ago that nobody moved on Whitmore Capital without Gerald's blessing. "Henderson," Arthur said, "everything okay?" "Arthur." Henderson's voice was strange, flat in a way that registered in Arthur's chest before his brain could process it. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that this is not a decision I made lightly." "What is it?" "I received a call this afternoon from a woman named Patricia Chun. She represents a client who holds a controlling interest in Whitmore Capital. She informed me of certain matters relating to my personal financial holdings." A pause. "Arthur, this client, he's not small. The real estate your team identified is the surface layer. I've spent the last 2 hours on the phone with our financial counsel, and what this man actually controls." "Henderson, stop." Arthur's voice was very quiet. "How much does he hold?" Silence. "Henderson, how much?" 51%, Henderson said, as of 6 weeks ago. The transfers were routed through 14 different vehicles across 3 countries. Our team missed it. Everyone missed it. The car was moving through late afternoon traffic. The city outside the window looked the same as it always did. Arthur Whitmore sat completely still. "He owns a company," Henderson said. "E.J. Monroe owns Whitmore Capital. And Arthur, I don't think this has anything to do with business." "What do you mean?" "The way Patricia Chin spoke about her client, the timeline of the acquisition, the fact that he was in your building this morning, personally, in a custodial uniform." Henderson paused. "Arthur, this man spent a year buying your family's company, and then he put on a janitor's uniform and waited to see how you would treat the people who clean your floors." The line was quiet for a very long time. Arthur's hands were completely still on his knees. "He was testing me," Arthur said. "It wasn't a question." Henderson said nothing. Outside the car window, the city moved through the golden hour of late afternoon. Beautiful and ordinary and completely indifferent, Arthur Whitmore had spent his whole life believing he was the most important person in any room he entered. He was now understanding, for the first time, what it felt like to have been wrong about that. And the worst was still ahead. The news station ran the story at 6 p.m. Not the audio clip. The footage. Derek, Marcus Webb's brother-in-law, had gotten clearance from the station's legal team. The footage was authenticated. The editorial team had reviewed it 6 times. They had run it past 3 separate legal consultants. At 6:02 p.m., the segment anchor said, "A disturbing incident at a downtown corporate tower this morning has sparked widespread outrage tonight. Security camera footage obtained by this station shows a young man, identified by multiple sources as Arthur Whitmore III, son of Whitmore Capital Group founder Gerald Whitmore, spitting on an elderly black janitor in the building's main lobby." The footage played. Clear, unambiguous. 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. By 6:15 p.m., it was the top trending topic on every major social platform. By 6:30 p.m., the story had been picked up by national outlets. By 6:45 p.m., the call started. Gerald Whitmore watched the segment on a television in his private office. He watched it once. Then he sat in complete silence for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. His assistant, who was present, counted, because she had never seen Gerald Whitmore sit in silence for more than 30 seconds in 15 years of working for him. Then Gerald stood up, buttoned his jacket, and called Arthur. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. The assistant could not hear what was said, but she heard the quality of Gerald's voice, and she had worked for this man long enough to know that quality. It was a voice he used when something was genuinely, irreversibly broken. Not anger, not disappointment. Something quieter and more final than both of those things. When he hung up, he sat back down. "Get Patricia Chin on the phone," he said. His assistant blinked. "The attorney? The one who—" "Yes," Gerald said. "That one." Arthur's phone was flooding. His personal number, which he had given perhaps 40 people in his life, was ringing constantly. Texts from friends. First shocked, then quieter, then silent. A text from his college roommate that just said, "Bro, what happened?" A text from a woman he'd been seeing that said nothing but a question mark. And then the professional calls started. 2 of the company's largest investors called the main Whitmore Capital line within the same hour. Both wanted emergency calls with Gerald. Both expressed deep concern about leadership culture. A hedge fund that had held 8% of Whitmore Capital shares for 11 years began moving to liquidate. By 7 p.m., Whitmore Capital's after-hours share price had dropped 6%. Scott Farley, the PR man, resigned by text at 7:22 p.m. He didn't call. He texted. That told Arthur something about how bad this was. At 7:45 p.m., Arthur arrived at his father's house. Gerald Whitmore met him in the study. He was seated. He gestured for Arthur to sit across from him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. "The building," Gerald said finally. "You knew he owned it?" "I found out at 4 o'clock, Arthur said. "I was going to call you." "The bank," Gerald said. "First Southern Regional. You know Henderson's personal holding company has $18 million in secured loans with that institution." "Ah, yes. I found out. Parks Family Trust has $22 million, Gerald said. "The 2 board members you called. The 2 you told me were with U.S. His voice was careful, measured, like a man being very precise with very dangerous materials. "They're not with us, Arthur. They cannot afford to be with us. Not anymore." Arthur's hands were clasped in his lap. He said nothing. "The company," Gerald said. "Do you understand what it means that Monroe holds 51%? It means the board meeting on Friday is not a discussion. It is an announcement. He already owns it. He has owned it for 6 weeks. We were the last to know. We can fight it," Arthur said. "Legally, the acquisition method, the shell companies." "Patricia Chun," Gerald said. "You know who she is?" "Yes." "Then you know we won't win that argument." Gerald stood. He walked to the window. 40 years, Arthur. I built this company for 40 years. He was quiet. "And this morning you spat on a man in the lobby. The room was very still. "I didn't know who he was," Arthur said. Gerald turned to look at his son. His expression was something Arthur had never seen on his father's face before. "That," Gerald said softly, "is exactly the problem." Arthur Whitmore sat in his father's study as the night came in through the windows. The company was gone. His reputation was gone. And somewhere across the city, an old man in a modest office was doing nothing dramatic. Just sitting, working, being exactly who he had always been. The trap had been set for a year. It had closed in a single morning. Camille Reyes published her story at 9:30 p.m. It was not the story she had started writing that morning. It was a much larger one. The headline read, "Who is E.J. Monroe, and what did Whitmore Capital's heir do to the man who was about to own his world?" The piece ran 4,000 words. It included the audio, a still from security footage, Dennis Okafor's account of the workplace culture, the access log showing someone had secured the footage before the suppression attempt, Calvin Osei's story, the 19-year employee who had lost his pension, told in his own words, on the record for the first time, and at the center of it all, a quiet, careful biography of Elias James Monroe. Camille had reached E.J. through Patricia Chun at 8 p.m. E.J. had agreed to provide a single written statement. No interview. No photographs. His statement read, "I have spent my life building things. Buildings, businesses, opportunities for people who were told the door was closed to them. I have never done this for recognition. I do not seek it now. What I seek, and what I've always sought, is simply this, that the people who hold power understand what it means to hold it, not for themselves. For everyone in the room with them, every room, including the ones being cleaned at 7 in the morning. That was all. No threats, no drama, no victory lap. The internet absorbed those words and was very quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet at all. Calvin Osei read the article in his apartment in Atlanta. He was 63 years old, and he read the whole thing twice. When he finished, he sat at his kitchen table for a long time, looking at the wall. His daughter called him at 10 p.m. "Dad," she said, "did you see the article?" "Yes," he said. "Are you okay?" He thought about it, really thought about it. The real answer, not the reflexive one. "I'm going to be," he said. Deja Simmons refreshed her phone and saw that her original post now had 2 million shares. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment with her knees pulled to her chest, reading the comments. Most of them were from people who had their own version of the lobby story, their own mourning, their own old man or woman or young person, someone who had been dismissed or humiliated in a moment that nobody powerful enough to care had witnessed. Except this time, someone powerful enough to care had been the one being dismissed. And that changed the story. That changed something. At 10:15 p.m., Jordan Mills, the 22-year-old IT contractor who had saved the access log, received an email from an address he didn't recognize. It contained 2 things. A digital letter, signed E.J. Monroe, that said, "Thank you for doing the right thing. The kind of character that requires courage to protect is rare and worth protecting." And a job offer from a company Jordan had never heard of, senior technology analyst. Salary 3 times what he currently made. Benefits package. Start date flexible. Jordan Mills sat at his desk and cried for exactly 90 seconds. Then he blew his nose, read the offer letter twice more, and typed a reply. "I accept." Arthur Whitmore was not sleeping. He was sitting in the dark in his apartment, reading the article on his phone, reading it carefully, the way you read something when the words are about you and you're trying to find a place where you weren't as bad as it says. He couldn't find that place. He read Calvin Osei's account. He remembered the man's face now. Barely. He had been 21. And Calvin Osei had been a fixture in the background of the office the way all the support staff were fixtures. Present but not seen. He read his own words to the janitor in the lobby, transcribed from the audio. "Watch where you put your equipment. This is a professional building, not a barn." He read E.J. Monroe's statement. He read it 4 times. That the people who hold power understand what it means to hold it. Arthur put the phone face down on the cushion beside him. He had held power his entire life. He had never once thought about what it meant. The board meeting was called for 10 a.m. Friday. Whitmore Capital's executive conference room, 34th floor. The same floor where Arthur had stepped off the elevator 3 mornings ago and walked into a mop bucket. 14 people assembled around the long glass table. 6 board members. Gerald Whitmore, 3 senior executives. Patricia Chun, Robert Achebe, and at the far end of the table, in a clean dark suit with no tie, sat Elias James Monroe. This was the first time most people in that room had seen him in person. The executives had looked him up after the article. They had found what EJ had allowed them to find. The real estate holdings, the LLC structure, the public-facing business records. Now, they were seeing the rest. Because Patricia Chin spent the first 15 minutes of that meeting presenting documents. Not arguing, not threatening, just presenting. The complete acquisition trail. Every share transfer, every vehicle, every regulatory filing, done meticulously and legally across 22 months. The controlling interest in Whitmore Capital Group, effective 6 weeks prior. The ownership structure of the building they were sitting in. The deed to the bank that held the personal financial instruments of 2 board members. The shareholder agreements that made any legal challenge extraordinarily difficult and expensive. The room was very quiet while Patricia talked. Gerald Whitmore was seated directly across from EJ. He had not looked away from the old man since he walked in. There was something in Gerald's expression that was hard to read. Not quite anger, not quite surrender. Something older and more complicated than either. When Patricia finished, she sat down, and EJ spoke for the first time. "Thank you all for being here," he said. His voice was what it always was, quiet, unhurried, carrying the weight of a man who had never needed to raise it to be heard. "I want to be direct with you about what this meeting is and what it isn't." He paused. "This is not a hostile takeover in the traditional sense. I have no interest in dismantling what Gerald Whitmore spent 40 years building. I have spent 40 years building things myself. I understand what that costs. I respect it." Gerald's expression shifted slightly. "What I am here to do," EJ continued, "is change what this company stands for. Not the financial model, not the investment strategy. Something simpler and something that costs nothing." He looked around the table. "How you treat the people who work for you. All of them, from the board level to the lobby." He let that sit. 3 mornings ago, your heir apparent spat on a man cleaning a floor in this building, in front of witnesses, on camera. He did not look at Arthur, who was seated against the wall. Not at the table, not a board member, present because his father had asked him to be. That man was me. But the reason this matters, the reason I moved the timeline up after that morning, is not because of what it meant to me personally. I have broad shoulders. I have weathered far worse. He finally looked at Arthur. It matters because Calvin Osei was in this building for 19 years, and nobody with power cared what happened to him. It matters because there are people in this company right now, today, who come to work every morning and are treated the way Arthur treated me. And they have no recourse, no visibility, no one watching, no one who will hold a board meeting about what happened to them. The room was very still. "I intend to change that," EJ said, "with or without the cooperation of this board. But I would prefer with it." He opened a folder in front of him. "I have prepared a transition plan. I am asking Gerald Whitmore to remain as chairman for the next 18 months, in an advisory capacity. I am asking this board to ratify a new employee dignity and equity framework, which Patricia will walk you through within 30 days. I am reinstating Calvin Osei's full pension, effective immediately with back payments, which I will fund personally." A board member, Park, the one with the family trust, said quietly, "And Arthur?" EJ's eyes moved to Arthur, still seated against the wall. Arthur looked back at him. He looked different from 3 days ago. Not broken, exactly, but changed in a particular way that only comes from having the armor you've worn your whole life stripped away all at once. "That's between Arthur and the people he's harmed," EJ said. "I'm not here to destroy him. I don't believe that's how this ends well." A pause. "But I think he has some conversations to have, starting with Calvin Osei." He closed the folder. "Gentlemen," he said, "ladies, I've been patient for a long time. I'd like to get to work." Gerald Whitmore looked at EJ for a long moment. Then he did something nobody in that room expected. He nodded, slowly, deliberately, the nod of a man who had fought and lost, and was choosing to recognize the difference between losing with dignity and losing with everything. "Let's get to work," Gerald said. And for the first time in 40 years, the future of Whitmore Capital was being decided by someone who had once been told the door was closed to him. Someone who had simply built his own. The lobby of Whitmore Tower was the same marble, same light, same morning quiet. But some things had changed. The custodial staff had new uniforms now. Not just better quality, but with names embroidered on the chest instead of just the company logo. A small thing. The kind of thing that costs almost nothing and means more than anyone who has never needed it can fully understand. Calvin Osei had declined EJ's invitation to return to work at Whitmore Capital. He was 63 years old and had built a life without it, but he had accepted the pension reinstatement. He had sat across from Arthur Whitmore in a meeting that lasted an hour and 40 minutes that neither man ever spoke publicly about. His daughter later said she had never seen her father look so settled after something difficult. Like he put something down, she said, something he had been carrying for a long time. Camille Reyes's article won a National Journalism Award. She was characteristically unmoved by the recognition. She had already moved on to 3 other stories. Deja Simmons was offered a position at a financial equity nonprofit 2 months after the story broke. She left her consulting firm without hesitation. Jordan Mills started his new job on a Monday in March. He was the youngest senior analyst the company had ever hired. On his first day, he met E.J. Monroe briefly in a hallway. "Thank you," Jordan said. E.J. shook his hand. "Thank yourself," he said. "You did the hard part." Arthur Whitmore did not return to Whitmore Capital. He spent a month very quiet, very private. Then he enrolled in a semester of coursework at a community college. Not because he had to, but because he said he wanted to start over somewhere that didn't know his name. Whether that became something real, whether the morning in the lobby had genuinely changed the architecture of who he was, nobody could say yet. That story was still being written. E.J. Monroe arrived at Whitmore Tower on a Tuesday morning in late spring. He rode the elevator to the 34th floor. He walked through the lobby. He stopped at the corner near the elevator bank, the exact spot where 3 months ago he had stood with a mop and a phone and the patience of a man who had spent a lifetime building what others had spent a lifetime telling him was impossible. The floor was clean. The morning light was the same as it had always been. He stood there for just a moment, not a dramatic moment, not a triumphant one. Just a man in a building he owned, breathing the air of morning that had finally arrived. Then he went to work. Some tests are not about the person being tested. They are about the world that watches and what the world decides to do next.